good afternoon to you all. Welcome to this combined Social and Ethics Committee and Blockchain Special Interest Group webinar on green blockchain. Sorry, losing my own train of thought. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome our two speakers this afternoon, both of whom are board members of the Institute. Ms. Josine Overdevest is the chair of our Social and Ethics Committee and obviously a member of the board. And Mr. Singh is now the chair of our Audit and Risk Committee. Congratulations, John. And also the chairperson of our Special Interest Group on blockchain and Bitcoin. John is well known to many of us for his chats on that subject. Today, Josine and John are going to explore the energy impact of software and applications and so on in terms of the title of Green Blockchain. So it is my pleasure to welcome our two speakers and to hand over to Josine, who will take us forward. Thank you, Josine.
Thank you very much, Tony, and welcome everybody to this afternoon webinar on green blockchain. I'll kick off our presentation for today, and John will take over the minute we start talking about blockchain, since he is our resident expert on the subject. For people who've attended the AGM last week, you will see, you will find the first part of the presentation to be quite familiar because I presented that last week. Because I'm quite interested, and we are from the Social and Ethics Committee, to see how we can make all our members more aware of the ethics of IT, because the mission and vision of our institute talk about promoting the ICT professional and ethical digital transformation. I really like this cartoon, which speaks about what's actually currently going on. You know, you see the science fiction, if you think about what George Orwell wrote and what Aldous Huxley wrote in Brave New World in 1984, a lot of what they predicted at the time has today come through. Not only the technologies that they could have imagined, but also the lack of considering moral applications. And I must say, I don't think that's always intentional. Sometimes that could be unintentional. Because just look at that tech company boss and how excited he is about the technologies that he could develop with his company. So I think that the role that ethics plays is looking at how can we keep creating powerful technologies, but also consider those moral implications. Because one of the things why that currently isn't happening is because technology actually evolves so much faster than our rules and regulations do. And the fast change, it's actually a revolution, I think. If we look at digital transformation, digital technology has become a part of all areas of our lives, and that results in fundamental changes. Well, one of the good things about that is that digital technology has also proven to be able to contribute to achieving the sustainable development goals. Remember the agenda for 2030. There's some research done that digital technology could have a positive impact on about 70% of the, I think it's 169 sustainable development targets. So if we talk about digital sustainability, so that's digital transformation in relation to the sustainable development goals, is looking how can we use digital technologies to accelerate environmentally and socially sustainable development, while at the same time mitigating risks and negative consequences. So, since the topic of this afternoon is green blockchain, I've looked up a couple of examples of how blockchain could actually contribute to achieving the SDGs. And I came across a few examples. For example, if we look at Social Development Goal 4, which is quality education, there's a solution that's talking about BlockCerts. It's an open standard for using, viewing and verifying blockchain-based credentials for academic certifications. So, and that gives individuals the capacity to possess and share their own official records. Another goal it can contribute to is reduced inequalities. And this is for people who know me, I work in bridging the digital divide in education in South Africa. And I actually hadn't heard about this project before, but it's a UNICEF project that aims to map every school in the world and their connectivity to help people understand what regions are lacking basic connectivity. And then you can start making your plans around it. And the last example is on responsible consumption and production, where there's also a blockchain-based e-marketplace. And I've seen that for more, but this is, for example, for seafood trading, which allows fishers to register and post the silver fishes and seafood on the platform. So you see how the blockchain also has interesting applications for sustainability. But unfortunately, like we already spoke about, there are negative impacts of digital transformation. We look at unsustainable consumption. So worldwide, the goal is to curb consumption, but with digital and our one-click same-day delivery opportunities, consumption has the chance to become more unsustainable. Misinformation is a critical one. There's been research done and it's been found that false information reaches a group of 1,500 people 6 times faster than true information does. The digital divides, and that's access digital divide, so people having access to digital infrastructure. It's the use divide, people having the right digital skills to use the digital infrastructure that they would have access to. And there I came across a very concerning statistic that in 40 countries where they measured the use, the majority of the adult population, for example, doesn't know how to attach a file to an email. And the last one is the quality. So that even if you've access to digital technology, you've got the digital skills to access it, you might not have the knowledge to know how to use the information that you find online. And the next one is human rights violations. So we're looking at privacy, we're looking at surveillance. And the easiest thing to understand is that human rights that hold true offline, so in the real world, should also be honored online, and that doesn't always happen. And then the elements that we'll be looking at today, the negative impacts of digital transformation, are energy consumption, and I'll show that how much that is next, and the generation of e-waste. So if we look at energy consumption, idea is that there it is, electricity consumption. So these are actually predictions from a couple of years ago, and where they look at the worst case scenario. It looks at the part that digital technology takes in the electricity consumption. And currently the energy consumption by ICT is increasing at 9% a year, which is quite high. And the share of digital technologies in greenhouse gas emissions has increased from 1.5% in 2007 to about roughly 4% today, and potentially 14% by 2040. So that's quite concerning. Okay, and here I'd like to show you a short video about electronic waste. So let me see if we can get that to play. It always takes a few clicks before it actually starts. Come. Oh. I'm gonna give it one more try, otherwise we just, there it is. Okay, off you go. If you can't hear sound, don't worry about too much about it, because that's just music. but you should be able to hear the sound. So I think that made clear how big the problem of e-waste actually is. And also that is predicted to double, and I don't have the exact numbers, but by 2050, it's expected to double compared to today. So that's quite horrible. So these are the negative consequences in general. So now I'm happy to hand over to John, who will speak a bit more about the specifics around blockchain. So John, I'm going to hand over to you, and please let me know when I can click on the next slide for you.
Thank you very much, Josine, and good afternoon to all the members. Normally, I speak mostly on technical side of blockchain, but in this instance, I'll be going on the more, the more environment-focused topic, and hopefully I can provide some good information to everyone in the room. So when we look at annualized Bitcoin impact on the environment in terms of energy and carbon, there's some interesting stats. So on carbon, it's 62.7 metric tons, I think it is, and that's comparable to a country like Serbia, Montenegro. In terms of electrical energy, 112.41 terawatt hours, so it's comparable to a country like Netherlands. And then electronic waste, 58.96. Not sure what the metric is, but I think it's in tons, and it's comparable to small IT equipment waste in Netherlands. So on the face value of it, it looks like a great deal of waste and impact on the environment. So Josine, if you can just move on to the next slide, please. If we compare this to countries like China and the US, China is 32% of the worldwide waste, USA is 70%, but a large network like Bitcoin, so Bitcoin I choose because it's the largest blockchain network currently in the world and the most active, and also it uses proof of work, which has the most impact on the environment. So that's less than a percentage share. So even though if we look at the figures, we see it compared to a country, we also need to recognize there's a very small percentage, and even if we remedy some of the environmental impact, it actually doesn't have a massive impact on the total figure itself. But nevertheless, we do need to consider the impact and try to reduce it as much as possible. Next slide, please. If we look at the carbon, it's the same kind of situation. And the major countries like China and the USA have massive footprints, but Bitcoin itself is less than a percentage. And again, we can do as much as we can, but it won't impact the total amount too much, but it's something that we need to bear in mind here. So if we go one slide forward, please. I just want to talk about some of the reasons why a blockchain, for example, like Bitcoin, would have such an environmental impact. So if we look at the total network, it's made up of nodes, which is basically computer servers or application-specific devices. And these devices run the Bitcoin software. And what happens is that you have various transactions taking place by people that control wallets. People can exchange for fiat currencies or for Bitcoin on exchanges, or they can buy various things from merchants. And these produce transactions. Miners then take these transactions and they put them into block headers. But what happens is they have to compete and solve a cryptographic puzzle in order to get the right to actually transmit that block to the rest of the network. And it is this solving of the cryptographic puzzle which produces consumption of electricity and high consumption. So it's an essential part of the network, because if this doesn't happen, then you don't get consensus across all the nodes, because each of the nodes are actually storing an individual copy of the blockchain, and they need to be kept in sync. And the cryptographic proof of work mechanism helps in that. It also helps secure the network and also reduces the possibility of fraud, because it is so expensive to actually solve that puzzle. You know, the amount of electricity that it requires, the expense is too much for someone to suddenly decide they want to defraud the network and lose their block rewards. So that is the reason why so much electricity is consumed. And if you go to the next slide, please. So the actual mining process is to hash a block header and repeatedly do so until your hash meets a certain target that's on the block header. And this process is very tedious, time consuming, and also sequential, because you've got to repeatedly do this process over and over again. And this is what consumes the electricity. Now, many people that are influential in the blockchain space believe that because of the value that a blockchain like Bitcoin delivers, they have a massive store of assets that have billions of dollars in value. They have the right to be able to use this electricity. However, we also recognize that it is also a responsibility to try and reduce the impact to an environment. And I think Josine will continue with the slide, and I will follow then with some of the ways that we can try and improve the footprint of blockchain on the environment. Over to you, Josine.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining that. So I don't know how many of you have heard of the Green Software Foundation. That's an organization, and you can see the where you can find them. The address is here. I can't see because sorry. It's an interesting organization. It started by big software companies, but also the big consultants like Accenture, to really take this topic of green software seriously. Acknowledging the negative impacts IT can have on the environment. So they've come up with a number of green software principles. You can read their full statement, their theory of change, but that all comes down to these green software principles. They also offer a course called Green Software for practitioners, software practitioners, and I highly recommend you take it, because it really takes you all through it in a lot more detail than we're able to talk about today. But the three main principles that their theory builds around is looking at energy efficiency, hardware efficiency, and carbon awareness. Because obviously what it all comes down to is that we need to emit the least amount of carbon. And one of the big carbon contributors is electricity, because almost everything we do emits carbon. It's just about how do we make sure it's the least amount of carbon. So energy efficiency, the first principle is consume the least amount of electricity possible. So that's really looking at all elements in your network and finding out where does the energy consumption come from. So that goes from your servers to the cooling mechanisms to the terminals that are being used, are they the most efficient? Also, for example, the user interfaces, are the websites that you build taking into account the amount of electricity it takes for a user to open the website, watch videos, and things like that. The second principle is looking at your hardware efficiency. So if you look at hardware, they contain a lot of embodied carbon, and that means the carbon that's being emitted in the production process of the hardware. So hardware, we're talking about servers, laptops, tablets, mobile phones, and most of these have the most most embodied carbon in the production process. And how can you get to hardware efficiency is see how can I expand the lifespan. So very simple methods could be, look at your company. How often do you get to exchange your mobile phone or get a new laptop? Is it 2 years? Is it possible to extend it to 3 years, or for a laptop from 3 years to 5 years? So expand the lifespan. And increase utilization. We all know from servers that are not optimally utilized. So how can we increase the optimal usage of our servers? And other ways of expanding the lifespan is also looking at having a repair, reuse, and recycle policy in place. So that's making sure that the hardware you do use, because we do have to use the hardware, is being used most efficiently. And the last one is looking at carbon awareness. And I think, now that's a bit, if I read that, it's almost like mathematical equations, but it's finding out, when to do more work when electricity is clean and less when it's dirty. And that has to do with where in the world do you actually use electricity, because some countries, in certain areas, they provide more clean energy. In other countries, so remember, what is clean energy? That's from renewable sources, and dirty energy is from fossil fuels. But also find out how your electricity provider deals with balancing the load during the day. So these are some of the general green software principles, and I think we can. I don't know if there at this point are any questions, or that we can move over to. There, I don't see any questions at the moment on this.
Josine, sorry.
Yeah.
There are a couple of questions. I'm not sure directly related to green software. Do you want to hold them till the
end? No, then if it's okay, we'll hold on to the end, and then we'll continue now with the specifics of these green software principles for blockchain. So I'm handing over back to John. Thank you.
Thank you, Josine. So in the blockchain area, there is a few things that can be done to try and move towards a more greener way of operating the business. The one is to transition to renewable energy. Sorry, so this wind energy or solar, so proof of work blockchains use a lot of electricity, and one of the ways is to try and use renewable energy sources. Now, the thing to understand is that electricity is a large cost component of a blockchain. So that's the greatest cost that a miner has. So it's in their interest to use the cheapest form of electricity. Sometimes that does mean they use fossil fuels because of that, or energy generated from fossil fuels. And that's one of the economic realities. However, as the world finds more and more cheaper ways of renewable energy sources, then I think blockchain will move towards that as well, because it does try to find the cheapest form of electricity because of the cost component. The next is to move from proof of work to proof of stake. There are a number of blockchains that have done this already, like Ethereum. So in proof of stake, miners have a stake in the form of owning tokens, and they have voting rights. And this is how they achieve consensus. Proof of stake is much more energy efficient and uses only a fraction of electricity that a blockchain like Bitcoin would use. So it is one of the ways that blockchains are evolving, especially the newer blockchains. Also, some of the bigger ones like Ethereum are doing this. And then lastly, to introduce carbon credits, so buying carbon credits from other companies to offset global emissions. This is not really a solution to the carbon problem, but it does help, finance other companies or other institutes to actually do something about carbon. I think lastly, Josine did touch on that hardware side of it. So in mining, they use very specialized mining equipment like application-specific integrated circuits. These are, they're very powerful machines, generate a lot of heat, but also the lifespan is very short, maybe a couple of years before they get out of date. I think the way that these are either repurposed or elegantly reused is important, because the waste generated from these types of circuits and application-specific integrated circuits are quite impactful, and I think we do need to look at that closer. But I don't think there has been a lot of work done in trying to get these machines repurposed or possibly to be used in a more repurposed in a more efficient way. So the next slide, please. Just want to touch on proof of stake. So I just used an example of how Ethereum, which is the second largest blockchain, uses proof of stake. So we don't want to go too much into details, but it's more about having voting rights. So you have proposers and different committees, and then there's randomly allocates to different proposers to propose the next block in the network. And this is so it's a different kind of mechanism to proof of work, and it's much more energy efficient, and it does rely on certain groups having an amount of tokens that establishes itself in the network. So it does have a little bit of more centralization than a Bitcoin network would have, but nevertheless, there are quite a few of these proposers and validators, as they are called. And because there's such a large amount, it does provide enough assurance that the actual working of the blockchain is fair and is happening at without there being any kind of fraud or activities like that. There's various things to protect that. So that's basically proof of stake, and that is what most newer blockchains are moving towards, because it's more energy efficient. So I think back to you, Josine.
Thank you. So, and I picked up that people are also talking about that in the chat. So if we look at sustainability, one of the issues still is that for 63% of CEOs, sustainability is not really part of their main strategic agenda yet. And if you look at how many CIOs are involved in the sustainability reduction, the sustainability projects in the company, that's an even lower amount. So maybe us as ICT professionals, let me give you some of the business incentives that would help you move this conversation forward in the business. So cost reduction is obviously one of them, because if you reduce the need, your electricity usage, obviously your electricity bill goes down. If you use hardware for longer, your costs will go down. So that's an important one. Next one is compliance with environmental, social, and governance reporting. And in itself, ESG compliance it's been found that investors more and more are looking at companies and in how far they are ESG compliant. So research was done in 2020 in the United States, where they found that companies with the best ESG scores had returns of investment that are 8% higher than the broader US market. So there's a advantage right there. And a Gartner study has found that 85% of investors considers ESG factors in their investment decisions. So ESG compliance is becoming more and more relevant. Now, another element is looking at who are our clients, who are our customers, and the more and more customers become, start asking questions of companies in how far they are sustainable, in how far they make sure that they emit less and less of carbon. So it's your brand resilience when taking customers into consideration. And another important one is employee recruitment and retention. Well, especially in the ICT industry, where ICT skills are in demand anyway. And we're looking at younger people, and it's especially younger people who almost grown up with the sustainability requirements hardwired in them. So if we want to recruit those young people with the skills and want to keep them, then that's also an incentive to keep them. So that's when we're looking at the business incentives. And what I spoke about earlier is how we need to take into account the moral implications of the work we do. And as the Institute of IT Professionals, we introduced the Code of Ethics for computing professionals. I think it was in 2021. And while legislation still is being made, there are no hard laws to say what you must or mustn't do. We can take this Code of Ethics and use it as a guideline for our behavior. But people often say, that's complicated. What's ethics about? It sounds so philosophical, sorry. And this, I think, explains it quite clearly. In the easiest sense is, how do I good for myself and for the other? And that's the triangle that we're looking at. So good, self, and other. And other, in this instance, could be both the environment and other people. Self is both myself, but also the organizations from which I operate. And if we look at our Code of Ethics, and most Code of Ethics, to be honest, one of the main ethical principles is to say, do no harm. So whatever we do, we need to ask ourselves the questions. And I think what is relevant, because now often we only find out the implications after we've introduced new technology. How can we have those ethical conversations at all points of the work that we do? So that's from design, development, and implementation. And how do we make sure that we're ethical is making sure that we've got as many people as possible looking over our shoulders. So, for example, if we go back to that science fiction author, these days, most authors work with sensitivity readers. So even they say, I can write my book, but especially if I'm dealing with another culture or another environment that I'm used to, let somebody from that culture or that environment read my book. That's a so-called sensitivity reader. So how can we, as ICT professionals in the various process of our work, get that sensitivity reader involved? Because the self, even if I think I'm avoiding harm, and my colleagues think the same thing, we might not consider all the people that our software has an impact on, or even the environmental impact. So how do we make sure that we do that right? So it's avoiding harm. That's a main ethical principle. And the other one is to ask yourself the question, now how do I contribute to human well-being and to society and to the environment? So that's going back to the beginning. How do I contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals? And maybe I can even make it more specific to indicate which of those goals those are. So that's the ethics component around it. And then, yeah, that's I think the content we have so far to offer you. And I'm very interested to find out, you know, what's your thinking, and do you have questions for either myself or for John? I don't see hands. I don't see questions in the chat. I hear that Tony has some. Oh, you have some connectivity challenges, Tony, or are you back?
I'm here. You know, I haven't dropped off, but it's been very iffy for me, so I hope not for the others. While I was scrolling through, and I'm going to start from the top, which means first questions first, and I noticed that, I'm just going to find it quickly, Tendai Mbuva, pardon if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, makes a question or a statement. He says, is there a correlation between growing e-waste versus paper waste office use? Is paper waste increasing or decreasing with e-waste as the world moves more towards the use of tech in our everyday lives?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I don't know the actual answer to that, but I do think that e-waste is a different kind of waste than paper waste. Because paper, we've found ways to recycle, and as you maybe picked up from that video, that e-waste with the toxins that come up, we haven't figured out ways yet to completely recycle that and keep that out of the environment. So e-waste is, I see that Moira has also commented on that. It's harder to biodegrade. So e-waste is a different thing. So I don't know the ratio between e-waste versus paper waste, but I do know that e-waste is a different beast from paper waste.
Thanks, Josine. Did you want to comment, John?
No, Tony.
Okay,
Thank you.
No worries. The second question also comes from Tendai, and it's, again, a bit of a comment or a thought and a question. There are some countries that have abundant green energy, like Greenland. Is it practical to move blockchain processing to such places? Interesting question. John?
Yeah, I think with the miners, they do move to countries that provide cheap electricity, so not necessarily abundant, but cheap, because it's the biggest cost component. So it does depend on what a country like Greenland is offering these miners. So they wouldn't move necessarily just because there's abundant energy, but mostly because there's cheap energy. So it's all about economics. So I don't think they consider the environment as the first priority, but more the cost component. Yeah. So unless there is some incentive for them to move there, and they won't necessarily move there unless it's the cheapest form of electricity around here. Thanks.
Thanks, John. And then George Phillips makes a comment. I wonder how powerful a change moving to proof of stake would have for most blockchains. John, I know you did touch on that a bit, but perhaps you want to expand, or your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Garth did answer quite well. They said it was a 99% reduction, so thank you for that, because I wouldn't have known what the percentage was, but I know it is a significant percentage, because it so with proof of stake, you are obviously using computers and servers, so that those do generate and use a certain amount of electricity, but because you're not using a energy intensive process like hashing, you use a lot less electricity. So again, it's yes, at least 99% reduction. So it is quite significant to move from proof of work to proof
Thanks,
of stake.
John. And here's a comment I'd like to read out from Grace Danielle, which as a professional body, I certainly think resonates. She says, just a comment, I think this was a very good webinar highlighting the importance of us as ICT professionals, not only being concerned with our professional growth, but also bearing in mind how our profession affects the environment and other people. I think it is something that we should definitely consider in our everyday work, especially when it comes to factors like e-waste. And before either of you two comment, all I can say is, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Josine?
No, wonderful, wonderful. And this is exactly, why we organize webinars like this, because we can also imagine a lot of you are busy with professional growth. And I think as an institute, it's also our role to look at it from this wider perspective and share this and bring this knowledge to you. So thank you very much for that feedback. Yeah.
And then there's some more comments. George Phillips has just posted, I think I would argue green energy needs to be global for blockchains. If we centralize mining and nodes in specific geolocations, we lose a major benefit of decentralization. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I do agree with that, because so one of the important properties of a blockchain, and especially like the original blockchain, which is Bitcoin, is the decentralization aspect. So we don't want particular governments or large organizations to control, these blockchains, and specifically one that has economic value like Bitcoin or Ethereum. So moving them into specific locations does increase the danger, because if they are forced to be in that location, they can be easily shut down. Whereas at the moment, even when China, had quite significant policies against mining, the miners just up and took their equipment and moved it to another country, and those kind of things happen, fairly often, and it ensures the survivability of a payment network like Bitcoin, because they are not stuck in one location. They will move if necessary. So it's so the person that posed that made the comment is correct. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, John. Delegates, are there any other questions? I don't see anything new in the chat at this stage. I was going to say something very tongue-in-cheek, and someone's going to slap me, but I'll say it anyway. Josine, you were saying a little earlier about the cost benefits, and I mean the benefits, some of the benefits for businesses, and one was cost reduction, obviously using less electricity and so on. And I was going to say very tongue-in-cheek, well, Eskom certainly helps us to do that, but of course that's not true, because we don't use electricity, we start using other forms of power generation. And I know we're not going there because that's not the purpose of this webinar. So that was tongue-in-cheek, and I'll give myself a slap on the wrists for it, but it certainly is an interesting time. And I think maybe just to ask you, Josine, I think, looking at the whole ethics of this particular, or should I say the focus of this particular webinar, writing ethical code and thinking about the ethical way that it impacts on our environment is obviously key to how our development community moves forward. Do you have any expanded thoughts on that? I mean, what should people be watching out for when they're involved in the space? And yes, I will go to greensoftware.org and have a look, but just some quick thoughts from yourself.
So it's, when you look at all the negative consequences that we mentioned earlier in the webinar, so the environmental ones are obviously the e-waste and the electricity consumption, but we also touched on misinformation. I think there's a lot of talk, and I think we've seen, the importance of ethics with the vast revolution in AI and machine learning models. And everybody's now talking about AI ethics, and what do those focus on? So that is looking at privacy, that's looking at misinformation, that's looking at intentional, but mostly unintentional bias. You know, I'm going back to the writers who say, well, these days, you know, it's important to have a sensitivity reader to figure out whether, you know, there's something wrong with the code I'm generating. So the best example, I've written a column about it, is looking at facial recognition. And I don't know if many of you remember, you know, on your iPhone in your photo library, you've got the possibility to, you know, your photo library brings up photos every day. Now look at this, lovely memories. Or they show a photo of your friend and then say, oh, do you want to see more photos of this friend? And then you say yes. And a couple of years ago, I found out that actually, when I said yes to one of my white friends, I would get all the photos with that friend in it. But when I said yes to one of my black friends, the algorithm threw up all the photos in my library with the most diverse Black people that I know, friends and acquaintances. So couldn't recognize the facial distinction of Black people, which I think is horrible. But that is, you know, if you just have white people creating the code and nobody comes in to check that for you, then you've got a problem. And I'm sure that, you know, often that's not intentional. It's just something that's not in your active thinking. So it is good to, like a writer, have you know, the sensitivity reader. So if you look at academics, a lot of them are now talking about ethics guidance, which is really what I said before. In every step of the process, make sure that you've got people who look over your shoulder, because also human rights violations, the misinformation, privacy. Yeah, well, I think I mentioned a lot of them. So that's also why we, as the Social and Ethics Committee, will continue to raise awareness, but also educate on different topics relating to ethics in our profession.
Awesome.
And so,
sorry,
yes,
sorry, I thought you finished. No.
No. So I just want to end up. So we do that by organizing webinars such as these. We write our monthly Ethics in IT column. But please, if you've got any questions, you say, now, you know, I'm stuck somewhere. I need help. Is this ethical? Yes or no? Please send a message, and we will be sure to help you with that.
Thank you, Josine. My apologies for interrupting. I didn't mean to do that. Just to let you know, I was saying intermittent. I've actually got a very unstable connection, which is very unusual. So I'm struggling to hear because I'm getting intermittent sound, but that's my side, not everyone else's, thank goodness. What I'd like to do at this stage, I don't see any further questions. So I would like to thank Josine and John. But before I sort of round off, I would also like to recognize online our new board chairperson and president of the Institute, Ms. Senele Goba. Senele is with us. I'm not going to embarrass her by asking her to speak because she's not prepared for that. But welcome, Senele. Congratulations on your election to board chairperson and presidency of the Institute. And we look forward to working with you as we do with John and Josine and the other members of the board. So from my side, to all the delegates who have attended this afternoon, sorry, not evening yet, thank you very much for joining us. To John and Josine for a very, very interesting conversation and a lot of information. To those who have put some content in the chat, also useful. Thank you to a few people who clearly are knowledgeable in these areas. That has added to the conversation as well. We as the Institute look forward to seeing you at our next event. As Josine has said, please read our newsletter, look at the code, join the webinars. If you aren't an IITPSA member, why not? Please join. We look forward to having you, join our Brains Trust and assist in spreading your knowledge and your wisdom. So thank you all for this afternoon. John and Josine, thank you very much for joining us and making your valuable time available. Thank you for the preparation that's gone into it. And to all of you delegates, we thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our next event and have a wonderful evening. Hello.
I don't mind. This is Senele.
Oh, there we go. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Over to you.
Yes, no, thank you very much. I won't take any further time. It's nice to see people attending this session, and thank you for welcoming me. Thank you, John and Josine, for such an insightful presentation. we really look forward to doing more, and I'm quite encouraged by the collaboration that we've seen between our special interest group in blockchain, as well as our committee on ethics. So please keep it up, and I hope everybody had a great time in the session. Thank you.